In this video, I'm going to tell you how to use hard light modifiers for soft light and soft light modifiers for hard light. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Sergio and I'm a commercial photographer here in Victoria, BC. And when I was first starting out, I definitely thought I needed a big, huge, large octa to create soft light. But that just isn't the case. And in this video, I want to break that down and show you how we can use small lights like this. Can we see this in the frame? Yeah, we do. Small lights like this in order to create softer light, and how we can still create hard light with something like a big round octa. So got our lovely model Manny over here that we're going to take a couple portraits of, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by that. Okay, so if we take our first shot nice and dark like this, we make sure that we're not getting any ambient light. I'm going to turn on my flash, see how bright that is, maybe a little touch over. All right. So what makes hard light versus what makes soft light, right? If we look at our example over here, we'll be able to see that the hard light is characterized by how fast the fall off is from highlight to shadow and how sharp that line is across our subject's face or whatever subject. So if we know anything about fall off, we know that the distance from the light to our subject over here is what's going to affect the majority of that fall off much more than whatever modifier we're using on it. So by increasing the distance, we're going to be able to decrease the fall off from on our subject's face, creating a softer light. Let's just move this as far back as possible. So now I've boomed that light quite a bit further away down in my studio, and I've increased the light output by 2 stops. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, we're missing it a little bit. Let's just get a little bit stronger. And now if we shoot that again and we compare the two. So if you look at both shots side by side now, you can see that as we moved our light source much further away, the shadow on the face starts to get filled in from bouncing around. Even though I've got this black piece of foam core here to kind of remove as much bounce as possible in order to create a little bit of contrast on our faces, you still see that there is quite a bit of extra detail in the shadows than there was before, which means that the fall off decreased. The amount that the highlight to shadow distance decreased. And that's just following the inverse square law. The further our light source is away, the more that we get an even spread of light across the frame. So that's one of the ways that you can use a tiny light source in order to create something that's relatively pretty soft. If I had a large octa next to my subject, it would look much like this bottom frame, much more like this bottom frame than the top one. If you want to even soften it further, what we can do is introduce a extra piece of diffusion layer. And now I know that we're throwing extra gear in here. I'm telling you not to buy more gear, but I'm also telling you that you need the second piece of gear to create soft light. But this is just to take it an extra step further. And I know that if you're a photographer, you've got a 5-in-1 reflector hiding somewhere in your closet that you haven't used in God knows how long. And the inside of those has a perfectly usable scrim interior that you can shoot the light through in order to create a nice soft look. This is what I mean by that. So if I bring our light source back here, back in the frame, and I introduce a piece of scrim or a piece of diffusion paper or whatever it is in front of our light source like this, let's just position it nicely. Now, if I take the exact same shot and I compensate for the extra stop of diffusion, so let's just do that. So if we take the first shot versus this shot over here, now if we take a look at the 2 shots side by side, you notice that we're starting to fill in a little bit of the shadows that are on the opposite side of our subject's face. And that's only because we're adding this piece of diffusion here that's spreading out the light and softening it, even though we're still using the same hard light reflector. So if we zoom in, we notice that our fall off has changed. Now we are creating a little bit more light on the opposite side of the face. And if you look at the sharpness of that line, we're getting a much softer line. We're getting a much more diffused line on our subject's face. There is one more kind of elephant or caveat that I guess we can mention, is that this is a specular reflector and this is a diffused piece of material. So that's going to change the highlight on, or the specularity on our subject's face. Especially if we're dealing with people, you'll notice that, let's say they have an oily complexion, well, that oily skin is going to show up a lot more with a specular reflector versus a diffused reflector. One of the ways that's a little bit more specialist, but you can use a net instead of this piece of diffusion paper that just kind of takes away the intensity of the light without taking away any of the specularity of that light, if that's something that you want to achieve. But I will say, especially if you're shooting portraits, the vast majority of reflectors or modifiers tend to have a white interior, and that's because it tends to look a lot more favorable on people's skin. An example of that would be this guy over here, this Mola soft lighter that I absolutely adore, but has a white interior over here that just creates a much softer look on the face while creating still this very punchy type of reflector-ish look. Now, all right, you use mostly umbrellas or octoboxes, or that's mostly what you have in your grip bag. So what can you do if you want to create hard light that isn't just putting a bare bulb reflector on your subject's face that's annoying and bright? Well, one of the things we can do is use that inverse square law again to our advantage and take our really big light and move it relatively far away from our subject so that it's smaller than our subject's face in order to create a harder light source. So let's do that. This guy off. We're gonna put on our brolly. All right, so now we've got our big brolly with an octobox in front of it, and we're gonna try to take the same 2 shots. So let's see what we can do now. Now obviously, if we keep it at the same relative distance to our subject, it's gonna be a much softer light source than what we just shot, right? So let's take a look. So now if we take a look at the octobox light result versus this plus our scrim, we put them side by side, you notice that they're very similar in terms of softness. They've got a good amount of light that's hitting the opposite side of the face. We're filling in a little bit of those shadows, and the relative hardness of the line that's crossing across the face is somewhat flattering. It's not too intense. Now I will say that this one seems to be a hair brighter, so let's bring this down a third of a stop. Now if we take the same shot, put them side by side, there we go. It's a little bit more consistent. We get a diffused light source. We don't get too much of that specular highlight. We don't get too much of a shiny highlight on the face, which obviously Manny has been taking care of his skin. He's not too oily today, so he's looking pretty good. But that means that we get to have a little bit more of a softer spread across the face. I mean, you know what? Let's take it even a step further. Let's go super soft. Let's see what this kind of looks like right here. How soft can we make it look? Should add an extra layer or an extra stop to compensate for the diffusion. And now, take a look at this versus what we just shot. Yeah, actually, that's a huge difference. So now if we take a look at those 2 shots, we can see a huge difference in the bottom shot that you're seeing is the one with the extra diffusion. And if you look at underneath the lips or underneath the nose, that light is filled in so much more. And I'm still only covering like half of the modifier realistically right now. But look how much difference an extra layer of diffusion can really make it, does really show up. Having something like this or your 5-in-1 reflector that you've got at your house is going to be more useful than just getting a huge softbox or octobox or whatever that costs hundreds of dollars, because those get really pricey really quickly, even with like the cheap knockoff brands. So just be careful with what you're doing. But let's just try to create one last look. We're going to bring this umbrella as far back as I can, and we're going to try to create hard light on Manny over here. All right, so now I've boomed the light just behind where the camera is right now and pointing towards our subject, and we're gonna have a look at the same shot, see if I can create this harder light, this harder shadow with a huge off-box. So if we take the same photo, a little bit overexposed, but we are getting quite a bit more of that harder light source. So let's just bring it down a tad, maybe 2/3 of a stop, take the same shot. If I compare it now to the same shot of this guy, I can see that at relative distance, I'm still creating a very similar look between this tiny little guy and that big umbrella. And sure, like, yeah, I need to have a stronger light source because the light is much further away and it's beaming into a much larger umbrella or much larger modifier, so you need a stronger light source in order to compensate. And I'm not gonna say that that doesn't exist. Of course, that does have to happen, but you can still create a harder light source with a big soft umbrella and a softer experience with a super tiny little modifier. So don't be thinking that you absolutely need to get a new piece of gear in order to get that shot. I'm sure you've got a 5-in-1 reflector in your room, and I'm sure you've got one of these laying around. And between the two of them together, you can create super hard light, super soft light, and should get most of the job done. I hope you guys liked this video. Leave a like if you did, maybe subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in a few days. Later.